Hi, we're Weezer.
Hi, how's it going?
We're gonna.
Keep going.
Just forgot everything she said.
Okay.
Okay, you're Weezer.
Hi, we're Weezer. We're back.
Pinkerton flopped. Weezer's 1996 sophomore outing was trashed critically and crushed commercially. That's since changed, I made a whole video about it, but at release, huge bomb. This was a justifiably painful and traumatic reception for Weezer frontman Rivers Cuomo. The album had been a deeply personal project. It was his baby, his vision, his thoughts, his words, unaltered by producers or executives thanks to the overwhelming success of the band's debut. You may have heard of it. Not only that, it stood untouched by the band's other members. Brian Bell, Matt Sharp, Pat Wilson were essentially demoted to a backup band during the production of Pinkerton, with some of them feeling more than a little disgruntled by the experience. I think we're settling into something now that's much different from where we started. In that period, I felt a bit more involved with what we were doing. A quote like that from Matt Sharp comes as no surprise to seasoned Weezer fans, for reasons that'll be explained later in the video. What's more shocking is what Pat had to say. The band's often lighthearted and goofy drummer was caught in quite the opposite mood by the alternative press. I don't think that we're not important, but the name of the band is Weezer. It's Cuomo's name, you know? He just wants to feel good. How he does that is by having ultimate veto and control with some semblance of a democratic framework that's infinitely adjustable to suit whatever he needs. A selective democracy, Pat explained. The interviewer, noting the drummer's clear frustration, asked why he stayed in the band, to which Pat responded, "I make a shitload of money. If you're asking the $64,000 question, would I be doing this if it didn't make me any money? I don't think I would." Alternative press would call it the band's unraveling, releasing the interviews in January of 1997 and giving the world a brief glimpse into just how complicated things had become in the Weezer camp, especially in contrast to the band's humble and naive origins. Adding insult to injury, that month Rolling Stone featured a critics' poll for the worst albums of 1996. Pinkerton landed the number 3 spot. In response to all this, Weezer took a short break. As was soon becoming routine when things went south, each member returned to their various projects outside of the band. Pat to the Special Goodness, Brian to the Space Twins, Matt to the Rentals, now entering his second year of work on the band's second album, and Rivers to Harvard for a third semester. It was a well-earned break from Weezer, one that Cuomo thought would solve all the band's problems. But by the time his work was finished at Harvard in May, he returned to find things about the same as they were in January. "There's an incredible amount of friction," he admitted. While Rivers remained committed to promoting Weezer's struggling album through further touring, the rest of the band was less eager. Least of all Matt, whose own sophomore album was facing further and further delays. The band had gone as far as auditioning substitutes for the bassist, when at the last minute, he joined the tour. This time as openers for No Doubt, rather than headlining acts. You'd think that emotion might have hurt band morale further, but friend of Weezer Justin Fisher recalls differently. They had all been arguing and it was a bad scene for a while, until the tour with No Doubt. Then they all kind of came together, and were having fun again. It's hard to know without perspective from within the band, but from the looks of it, this was a true return to form for Weezer. Back to what made them want to form a band in the first place. Perhaps even laying the foundation for a third album. Until tragedy.
Hi, I'm Serena Altshull with MTV News. This hour with one of the year's saddest stories concerning the band Weezer and 2 young sisters from Utah, Michael and Carly Allen, who managed to break through the wall that usually separates performers and their fans.
On July 9th, 1997, Weezer fan club founders and longtime friends of the band Michael and Carly Allen, along with their younger sister Trista, passed away after losing control of their car. They had just started following the band on their No Doubt tour, driving late at night on their way to Weezer's next show in Utah. The band was notified of the painful news on July 10th, canceling a July 14th concert to serve as pallbearers at the sisters' memorial. The band then fulfilled the rest of their touring commitment, returning to Los Angeles on August 15th to perform a benefit concert for the Allen family. I'm happy that we have this opportunity to do something, to show them how much we love them. They really were the strong force holding the whole community together. Matt Sharp added, even when we had our bad times, which we've had a short period of that, they were the one positive thing that kept everything together. I mean, if they can make us look good, they can make anyone look good. Ultimately, it was the sisters' passing mixed with continued infighting that would make the tribute concert Weezer's last live performance for nearly 3 years. In the meantime, side projects. Cuomo initially returned to Boston, Massachusetts for a 4th semester at Harvard, only to quickly change his mind and drop out after being hit with a sudden wave of creativity. Now writing songs for the first time since Pinkerton's pre-production and thousands of miles away from the nearest Weezer member, he scrambled to find an outlet, quickly throwing together a band featuring guitarist Kevin Stevenson, who would eventually share his perspective for the controversial Weezer biography, Rivers Edge. The first time I went down to practice at Rivers' house, I knocked on the door and no one answered. It was a nice small house in West Cambridge, but not how you'd expect a rock star to live at all. I knocked on the door a little bit to see if anyone was there, and Rivers was sitting at the kitchen table eating a bowl of cereal. And I said, "Rivers, it's Kevin," and he didn't say anything. So I just walked in and stood around in his kitchen while he ate his cereal. He had milk to his right and cereal to his left, and he kept filling his bowl, and I said, "Hey Rivers, what kind of stuff do you have planned that we're gonna play?" No answer, eating his cereal. I said, "Okay, Rivers, I'm gonna go home. I'd had enough of that shit." So I turned on my heel, and then Rivers came to life. He's like, "We're gonna practice in a half hour." And I said, "That's cool. What kind of stuff are we gonna do?" And he starts dribbling a soccer ball all over the house. I'm like, "Rivers, who are we gonna be playing with? What kind of songs are we gonna be doing? Dribble, dribble, dribble." I said, "Okay, Rivers, I'm going home now." And he said, "No, come on, let's go downstairs." So we went down to his basement where we would rehearse, and he showed me some stuff. But that's how he is. Really strange. He gets himself wrapped up in anything, and it's hard to make contact with him. He's a strange guy. This is by far the longest unedited quote I have ever put in one of my videos, but I feel like it tells you everything you need to know about Rivers Cuomo. He's a strange guy. Kevin's questions would all soon be answered when drummer Zeph Courtney and bassist Mikey Welsh arrived shortly after. Together, they would perform whatever the king in thick rims commanded. Rosemary, 1,000 Years, The Prettiest Girl in the Whole Wide World, Baby, Fun Time, American Girls. They were the tryout band, playing hypothetical Weezer songs under no name except Rivers, an arrangement that wouldn't last for more than 2 shows, with Kevin claiming this stemmed from his own discomfort. I called Rivers up and told him, "Look, I'm not gonna play with Mikey and Zephin anymore. I'm just not enjoying it." I said, "Man, I don't want to quit your band, but that's what I'm doing." So Rivers hung up on me. I figured I pissed him off and that was it. But 5 minutes later, the phone rings and it's Rivers. He's like, "Okay, we got a new band, we're all set." Big talk coming from the guy that wasn't even mentioned in Cuomo's letter to the Weezer fan club. At the very least, we know he was there, and we know there were 2 bands, the second actually having a name. Homie, featuring drummer Fred Eltingram and bassist Drew Parsons. These shows explicitly featured songs not meant for Weezer, country-inspired acoustic ditties described by Cuomo as goofball songs. It was under the title of Homie that Rivers would record one song for the soundtrack of the obscure 1998 Disney comedy Meet the Deedles. I mention this only because it would serve as the last time Matt Sharp would collaborate in the studio with Cuomo. The Weezer bassist was staying at Rivers' Boston home when he was asked to produce the song, if nothing else proving that for a considerable period after Pinkerton, Sharp and Cuomo remained friends. Rivers and the regular Homie lineup actually recorded material for a studio album of their own, but it never materialized. Ultimately, these 2 side projects would serve as nothing more than that. Side projects. A method for Cuomo to build some extra confidence in preparation for the triumphant reunion of Weezer. So, in February of 1998, without so much as a phone call to his homies, Cuomo left Boston and returned to Los Angeles. It was pretty lame, the way he ended it, Stevenson admitted. Back home, Rivers reunited with Pat Wilson and Brian Bell to test the waters, notably Sharpless. The bassist was on the fence at this point Weezer-wise, but again, still hung out with Cuomo, watching the US-Brazil Gold Cup match together upon his return. That March, the band made their first public appearance together in over a year for the release of Meet the Deedles, and you guessed it, no Matt. Funnily enough, the band member most often left out of drama was again the first one to call foul, with Wilson telling SonicNet, "Matt needs to concentrate on the rentals, and we need to make our record. I think it's likely that we'll make it without Matt." And, much to the shock of absolutely no one, especially you as I've spoiled it countless times, Pat was right. It's hard to say exactly when Matt left, but the cover of the summer Weezine lets us know that it was official by June, with Mikey as his replacement. Yeah, there was a Weezine, get over it. So why did Matt leave? Well, the answer remains vague to this day, beyond the usual creative differences. But just from interviews and context clues, it clearly stems from a lack of input in Weezer compared to near total control of the Rentals, who at this point were still struggling to finish their second album. Yes, the same album that was causing trouble during Pinkerton's production, and they wouldn't finish it for another year. So it makes sense why he didn't want to juggle being Rivers' second fiddle on top of that. But what I find more interesting is how the bassist that Cuomo fired after 2 concerts managed to get a gig in the main band. My guess? Aside from an obvious talent on the bass, personality. Mikey was a jubilant character. As the founder of one of his band's labels would describe, "I thought Mikey embodied what was fun about rock and roll when he first started out. He was young, cocky, had great clothes, and instantly made people take notice of him." That, mixed with his affinity for cross-dressing, made him a great fit for Weezer. And now, with a bassist that wasn't bouncing around Europe trying to finish the same album for half a decade, Weezer could at last get to work on album number 3. Starting in August of 1998 and making quite a bit of progress. At the very least, enough for Pat Wilson to tell SonicNet that they were nearing the end of pre-production and that it was going to rock. What, you want to see the article? Okay, let me just... God damn it. Much like most Weezer interviews from the early internet, many of the demos rehearsed and recorded in the summer of 1998 have been lost to time. Damn That Wine, Old Backwater, I Have to Kill You, Turn It Off, Now, and Every Man have no available recordings online. Though, from what has been released from this era, we do know this was a heavier direction than what was seen on the Green album. Not deeper, per se. Cuomo was still hesitant at this point to write about personal experiences, with Pinkerton so fresh on the mind, but heavier and darker, as some of these song titles imply. Trampoline, Sunshine, and Everyone have since had their demos released or leaked and reveal almost a grunge sound not commonly seen in Weezer's discography. But for whatever reason, this new direction did nothing for Cuomo. By the end of 1998, all progress ceased on album 3. I was writing songs every day, but something wasn't clicking for me. It felt terrible, but I just kept banging my head against the wall. Eventually the guys said, "Rivers, we can tell this isn't going anywhere. We're leaving." So they all left town to do their own thing. And then I was just on my own in my apartment. And at that point, I really didn't have any friends in town either. I disconnected my phone and I painted the walls of my room black. I wasn't aware that I was turning into a freak or that I was becoming negative. In my mind, I just felt that I needed to be alone. This was the start of what has been dubbed the Black Room era. Just as Rivers described, he disconnected himself from the world, not speaking to anyone for months on end. This all stemmed from a deep insecurity in his songwriting abilities. With what Cuomo perceived as the overwhelming failure of Pinkerton, he quickly tried to pivot his style, as indicated by instructions he wrote for himself at the end of the Pinkerton Diaries, August 18th, 1997. 1. Melody small. 2. Progressions, less stock, still diatonic. 3. Lyrics, less goofy, distracting, less lyrics, stop telling stories. 4. Structure, stop making sense. In essence, keep it simple, stupid. But as he would find during the summer 98 sessions, nothing about this was simple. You can't just change your nature on a dime and make the music you think you're supposed to make. Rivers understood that now. So, does that mean he went back to his old style? No. He took things even further. Not only would he write impersonal, repetitive, catchy songs, he would analyze deeply what made the songs catchy, to turn songwriting into a science. I began to think of my writing sessions as experiments from which I could learn whether or not they turned out good. I disciplined myself to write a steady stream of these song experiments, giving each a number and keeping a log of my work called The Catalog o' Riffs. I analyzed a large number of writing methods, varying what seemed to be every possible facet of the process. The order of the steps, guitar, melody, lyric, beat, riff, etc., the tempo, the feel, the level of distortion on the guitar, whether I was composing aloud or in my head, the time of day, my emotional state, whether I had eaten or not, the number of drinks I had imbibed, if any. My goal was to ascertain the one method by which I could write the best songs. So he experimented. In a dark apartment, with black walls and no windows. Alone, with no phone and no friends. He sat and wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. 11 months and 91 experiments, as he called them, before one day, he snapped. Without an instrument or a pen in hand, he finally started singing about himself. My brain is working overtime. I need something to ease my mind. And as my thoughts go manic, I reel and start to panic, 'cause there's no place to hide behind. Of course, for Cuomo, snapping meant writing a pop rock song. But hey, that's him. That's his style, that's his music, and it was essential for his growth. It was this break from that toxic routine, and the writings of Friedrich Nietzsche, oddly enough, that would convince Cuomo to get back to the good life, to leave the darkness behind. So, he sold his apartment and bought a house. This started an era of steady rebuilding. You see, while Weezer never formally broke up, the band basically dissolved in 1999. So much so that when Cuomo emerged from his self-imposed solitude, he still only contacted his band members through their manager. This all changed, however, when Weezer received an offer they couldn't refuse. A high-paying gig performing at the Summer Sonic Festival that August in Japan. That seemed to kind of kick Rivers' ass. I don't think we would have done anything if it wasn't for that show. So, with only a few months left to bring Weezer back from the brink of collapse, rehearsals kicked off at Cuomo's new home studio that April. Early on, there were a few days where the mood was a little down. Rivers was pretty quiet about just about everything at first, so there was a little confusion as to what was going on. However, after a few days of reacquaintance, things seemed to brighten up considerably, and the songs started to really rock. Luckily, the band had plenty of material to play around with. But the next step was testing the waters live, to see if the band had what it took to play in front of an audience again, or more importantly, to see if there was still an audience at all. Rivers called me to set up the first official Weezer show after their long hiatus. They wanted to play a show in Santa Barbara, and he told me that it wouldn't be a secret show, that they were going to use the Weezer name in advertising so that people would come. The Yucatan had a capacity of about 300 at most. I told him the place is going to be sold out really fast, and he said, "Oh, I don't know, we haven't played for a while. People may not remember us." You can imagine the shock when the band arrived to find that the show was indeed sold out, with folks lined up around the block. What Weezer didn't know is that behind the scenes, fans had been gearing up for a comeback since the moment they left. This was thanks in part to the rise of Weezer.net. Run by friend of the band and primary source for this video, Carl Cook, it quickly became the internet's one-stop shop for Weezer news, history, contests, and media. That, mixed with news groups, fan sites, and the rise of file-sharing services like Napster, emboldened an all-new generation of Weezer fans, thirstier than ever for the return of alternative rock's favorite nerds. So, it's really no wonder that once they did return, the fans found them. I think the loyal fan base gave us the most motivation to get back out there and continue as Weezer, and make another record. If we didn't have that, I think we might have gone our separate ways. The songs were written, Cuomo was confident, and the band were united. Now all they had to do was make another album. Yeah, easier said than done. It seemed like a simple task, just book some studio time, find a producer, and make the damn thing. Again, it's not like there was a shortage of music to work with, but when Cuomo went ahead and booked a couple weeks at a local studio for October, the band's label quickly shut them down. Yeah, the label. Did you forget about the label? so did they. Truthfully, the last couple years had been as complicated for Geffen Records as for Weezer. With their parent company Seagram buying out Polygram in 1999, a chaotic merger ensued, leaving many sub-labels, executives, and bands in the dust, including Weezer's own label, DGC, formerly under Geffen, now absorbed into Geffen, which was merged with Interscope, which was merged with A&M, which was dissolved, but they kept the name and I've gone cross-eyed. Shockingly, Weezer themselves came out of the kerfuffle mostly unfazed, with the exception of their close friend Todd Sullivan. Not only was he the A&R representative that got the band signed to DGC, he was their man on the inside, their translator for communicating with the white collars. With him gone, they had no power and no wiggle room. They did as the label commanded. And the label said, no new albums until you find a producer. But again, this wouldn't be easy. The band met with Nirvana producer Butch Vig and Pearl Jam collaborator Brendan O'Brien, but they were busy for the rest of the year. Jerry Harrison, formerly of the Talking Heads, Jerry Finn of Blink-182's Enema of the State fame, and Dave Sardy of the sonically groundbreaking band Bark Market similarly slipped through the cracks. Worse yet, with the deadline thoroughly missed for those October sessions, every other studio in LA was booked through the rest of the year. For a short period, it honestly seemed hopeless. All this goodwill and confidence built up for an album that they literally could not make. Until their guardian angel returned to them, shining down from the heavens like, I don't know why I'm being so weird about this. Rick Ocasek agreed to be their producer again. In case you don't know, he served as producer for the Weezer album you definitely do know. He guided these guys when they were basically children and set them on the path to glory. If you need a specific example, he pushed Rivers to put Buddy Holly on the album. With a reliable name like Rick's attached to the project, it wasn't long until the label loosened their iron grip on the band, with Geffen's president himself coming down to Cuomo's makeshift garage studio to give Weezer's Green album the green light. Actually, you're not supposed to know it's called that yet, forget you heard that. Another miracle followed suit in the form of a nearby recording space. The iconic and often renamed Cello Studios had their schedule clear up just in time. This really perked up Rivers, as the band would be recording their next album in the very place where the Beach Boys recorded Pet Sounds. Production officially began for Album 3 on December 10th, 2000, after Weezer managed to cut down their 64 album contenders to about 25, but with Rick's help, that number quickly shrank to less than 20. Give Me Some Love, Homely, Starlight, Oh Girlfriend, My Best Friends Are Gone, Crab, If You Want It, Inside a Smile, Knockdown Dragout, Don't Let Go, Crying and Lonely, Break Up, Hash Pipe, and Oh Lisa. Ocasek fought for one more, however. One you may have heard of. We probably wouldn't have done the song Island in the Sun if it wasn't for him. I'm telling you, the man had the gift of prophecy. Production went off mostly without a hitch. Trust me, as a YouTuber, it pains me to say there was no drama, but it seems that whatever tensions cropped up around Pinkerton's production mostly dissolved with time, as all Weezer members not named Rivers slowly learned to accept the quote, selective democracy, or leave. And so, as the weeks passed by and the album grew nearer and nearer to completion, it was Cuomo alone who continued to fine-tune the album through the mixing process and beyond. Well, Cuomo and Cook. I'm sitting there and Rivers is like, I want to hear what this sounds like with an extra bridge. So I'm on my computer making a kind of rough mix. It doesn't even sound that good because it's not a quality dub, Carl explained. Every night I'd be up burning these practice discs to see what the stuff sounded like, and I'd be up till 4 or 5 delivering the CD to him and collapsing. Time finally ran out on February 17th, 2001, when the band was scheduled to show the label their finished product. This was a bit of a stressful deadline. Their new bosses at Interscope had not only delayed pre-production on the album by a month, but also came in at one point mid-production to share their dissatisfaction with it. The music industry doesn't exactly work under the 3 strikes and you're out system, but a third rejection would have been a devastating setback. And yet, when Weezer sat down and pressed play on that CD, they saw nothing but approval in the eyes of their corporate overlords. Weezer's next album would be releasing as intended in May. I'm sure it helped that the band's upcoming Yahoo Out Loud tour was selling exceptionally well. According to Rivers Edge, 15 of the 20 dates, totaling 90% of the trek, sold out before any advertising was announced beyond the World Wide Web. 15 out of 20 is 75%. Either way, it just goes to show how uniquely devoted Weezer fans were in 2001. The question now was if that devotion would shine through for the album, and if it would rub off on the rest of the listening public. A question that would loom over the band for the next 3 months. Weezer's self-titled Green album released on May 15th, 2001. By the end of production, its track list had shrunk further than ever to a blistering 10 tracks and a 28-minute runtime. These were Don't Let Go, Photograph, Hash Pipe, Island in the Sun, Crab, Knockdown Dragout, Smile, Simple Pages, Glorious Day, and Oh Girlfriend. In commemoration of the long-awaited release, the band performed a show at the same Tower Records music store where Cuomo was first introduced to alternative rock just a decade prior. A better writer could find a metaphor there or something, but I'm just itching to hear how Weezer's comeback did in the mainstream. And it did pretty fucking well. Green scored rave reviews from nearly every major and minor music publication in 2001. Rolling Stone, Entertainment Weekly, Drowned in Sound, Kerrang, and likely many more since Lost to Time. Better yet, the album sold like hotcakes, debuting at number 4 on Billboard's Top 200, and clinging onto the list for a further 36 weeks, reaching gold record status the same day Pinkerton did. Yeah, the 5-year-old album and the 2-month-old album both sold 500,000 copies on July 3rd, 2001, with Green nabbing platinum just 2 months after that. Factor in the monstrous successes of Hashpipe and Island in the Sun, both on TV and radio, add a pinch of SNL, Conan, Leno, and MTV Music Award performances, and yeah, Green was a hit. This overwhelming positivity is reflected in Cuomo's attitude post-release. Rather than receding to Boston a third time in search of some fulfillment, he stayed in Los Angeles. He toured with Weezer for the next year, rehearsing and demoing new songs for an album set to release that next spring. Furthermore, he appeared confident and self-assured in interviews for the first time ever, telling Rolling Stone that September, "I think the biggest misconception about me is that I'm sad or depressed. I'm living the dream every waking minute." Adding, "I think I'll treat myself to a little cough syrup and codeine when I get home." And that was the last thing he said before walking away. That was his triumphant exit. Weird times, man. Still, mostly good times. In terms of a post-release atmosphere, the Green album had the best of any Weezer album so far. But it wasn't perfect. Mikey Welsh had been a great fit for Weezer. I can't speak much of his talent on the bass, but his personality shined. Reading interviews for this video, it's plain to see how quickly he meshed with his bandmates. An obvious bond. But unbeknownst to him and the rest of Weezer, he had been silently suffering long before he joined the band, with undiagnosed bipolar disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and borderline personality disorder. That, mixed with a growing drug dependency and the further stresses of a near-endless touring schedule, started to take a major toll on Mikey's mental and physical health. At the beginning of a 3-month European tour with Weezer, I started slowly falling apart. Without getting too graphic, by the time the tour was winding up, my weight had gone down to about 140 pounds. I'm 6'2", and mentally, completely wiped out. Upon returning home from the tour, Mikey suffered a nervous breakdown and an overdose, later confirming it was a suicide attempt. Thankfully, he was found minutes before his heart stopped, but he was left in a coma, while Weezer and co. were left completely oblivious. All they knew was that Mikey went to visit family in Boston, stopped answering their calls, and hadn't shown up for the filming of their second Island in the Sun music video. Rumors quickly cropped up in the Weezer message boards and forums, but all Cook could tell listeners was, without any word from anyone close to the matter, we are about as much in the dark as the fans on this one, and are forced to speculate. Fueling tensions was another tour that was scheduled to begin less than a month later, spurring the band to hold private auditions for a temporary replacement, and finding one in Scott Schreiner on August 19th. But somewhere along the line, temporary turned permanent. Unlike with Matt, we don't know exactly when this happened. It just did. In May of 2002, Rivers told CD Now that Scott was their permanent bassist, and that he couldn't comment on Mikey Welsh. In November of 2002, Mikey was supposedly near the end of a messy legal battle with the band, telling the Boston Tab, "It's been like this gaping wound, with Cuomo pouring salt in it for a long time." Welsh's story continued for another 9 years, as he collaborated with other bands, settled his differences with Weezer, and flourished as an artist in his own right, until his death in 2011. But as far as what exactly went down in 2001, these interviews are all we have. Really. I guess it's complicated. Honestly, there's plenty more complicated stuff here. Like how there were quite a few negative reviews for the Green Album mixed with the positive majority, and plenty more since release. Or how lots of those devoted fans of the Blue Album, and especially Pinkerton, weren't all that interested in the band's new sound, with some even calling them sellouts. Or that really weird interview where Rivers got super mad at Brian Bell for mentioning his band the Space Twins. Like, really upset. For the rest of the interview. I guess we could call these growing pains. Because that's what Green was all about, really. It was a transitional project, as much as it was an album in its own right. An experiment. A bridge from old Weezer to new Weezer. Although to those on the outside, in the mainstream press or teenage MTV viewers, it may have seemed like the band was dormant for 5 years, it truly was the most impactful period in Weezer history. It saw fluctuations in sound, dynamics, aesthetics, and membership, but it was all intentional. Because from the moment Cuomo believed that Pinkerton failed, he wanted one thing out of the band's next project: reinvention. And I think he got it. Hello, if you liked the video, like the video. If you like me, subscribe. I have more videos, so you should watch those videos. Thank you. I'd like to give a special thanks to John D. Lurison for his book, River's Edge, as well as the dutiful contributors at Weezerpedia and all the other sources in this video. Go check them out. And an extra special thanks to you for watching till the end. Leave a comment so I know you did. This video took way too long to make, so I'm gonna take a nap. Goodbye.